right. Hello, everybody. It's Sunday night. It's time for another episode of Explain Yourself. And our guest tonight is Kevin Garcia.
Howdy.
Kevin, how's it going?
It is going well. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I got the Kickstarter. I've got South by coming up. I'm here in Austin. I got actually too many things going on now that you mentioned it.
It does sound like a lot. The book you mentioned is called World War Comics. It is live on Kickstarter now. It's got 11 days to go. Tell us like the quick elevator pitch of World War Comics.
So it's a World's War Comics because it's the idea of a world war that could involve more than one world. But basically, it's a new take on the Golden Age, a new way of looking at and kind of re-examining this kind of like idealized past. And I wanted to have characters that had real history to tell that story. So that's why I dug through the public domain to make, they're technically original characters, are technically my characters, but they're based on those public domain characters. So there is an actual history behind everybody in the book. And that was very important to me.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. That's one of the things I saw and I thought was really cool because I get into a little of the public domain stuff and the Golden Age characters myself. So I was really excited to see that and pumped to talk to you about this book. In the chat, Joey Galvez, our co-host, is out tonight. He had some stuff he had to do, but wanted to be here, and I'm glad he could make it in the chat.
How dare he not be able to be here?
He has a lot going on.
No, I heard your guys' last episode, and I really was enjoying hearing you guys talk. And you had a friend of mine on who does commissats, and I was like, always love that stuff. Love it.
Yeah, it was great to finally talk to him. We've been working on our book Archetypes, which I guess I should mention now. We've got that. This is live for 17 more days, and I'm going to share it here if StreamYard will allow me. They changed Kickstarter's interface, so things are a little wonkier than they used to be with the menu jumping out. But this is kind of our homage to Wizard Magazine. It's going to be we're going to have some comic stories in there, some short 8-pagers from Camazotes Comics, which you mentioned, a story called The Lighthouse from the team from Horus and Hell. I've got a quick story in there called Ace Falcon, which is in the Scarlet Twilight universe. And then we have a ton of marketing information, advice for comic writers and artists, people looking to start their Kickstarters but don't really know how to get going. We also have some stuff where there's going to be like sample press kits, an interview about how important press kits are, all sorts of stuff. I think it's great if you kind of miss Wizard Magazine and wish there was something like it that did, that kind of dealt with the way the comic scene is today, especially for indie creators. So head over to Kickstarter and check this one out.
When I saw that on Kickstarter, I really appreciate that you were talking about ways to help other creators, like I've been a reporter before. I've been in journalism for 25 years, and I've been on the receiving end of those, press kits and stuff. And those are very, very useful. But at the same time, I personally don't have a lot of experience with managing a project. You know what I mean? Like I can write it. I work with the creators. I'm good at like talking to the press, but it's that how do you run a project? And I love that that's something that you're giving advice to on those different aspects of project creation and promotion. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's super important as like I'm a creative. I do a little bit of this myself when I set up my first campaign, but I started working with Joey at Geek Collective, and that's what Geek Collective does is it can kind of create your campaign for you, can help you out with videos or trailers. We can, obviously kind of advise people on what they should be doing, press kits, things like that, helping to get interviews set up. So any creators that are kind of looking to start something new, maybe they're doing their first Kickstarter, definitely check out the magazine or hit us up at Geek Collective, because that's in addition to, me running my projects and Joey doing his stuff. We do a little bit of that kind of as consulting. And it's a good way to, network with other creators, see what other cool stuff other people are doing, and just to help out with. I think a lot of times when I was guilty of this starting out on Kickstarter, you end up reinventing the wheel every time somebody else new starts this. And, it makes a lot of sense to kind of go ahead and take advantage of what other people have been doing this for a while, have learned, and seeing how things change.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And we've worked with some great campaigns and are working with some really cool stuff coming up this year, which we're excited about. But back to World's War Comics. There's that menu acting up like I was worried it would. But I thought this was a really cool looking book. I love Golden Age stuff. I love pulp stuff, which anybody who's tuned in before and heard me see my comics would certainly know I'm a big fan of that. But tell us just a little bit more detail. You mentioned that this kind of piggybacks on some continuity from Golden Age characters.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm sharing my screen with you as well. Yeah, my goal was, well, let's be flat out. I've said this before in my intro video and stuff, and that is that a friend of mine made a little comment about like, what if the Golden Age happened today? And he completely meant, what if comics sold today like they did in the 40s? Because in the 40s, you had comics selling in the multiple millions on a regular basis, and the only time since then we've had that is the early 90s. So that still wasn't as close as it was. So I understood what he meant, but my brain went a different direction. I started kind of reevaluating, like, well, what did the Golden Age mean? What were the things that happened because of it? What were the things that caused it? And as I started putting all that together, I started developing a story, and I realized that the story needed to have heroes that had a history. So the main characters of my story are all based on actual public domain characters that had adventures in the 40s. So like, if you read the comic and you wanted to go back and read more adventures of these characters, these adventures already exist. They're already out there. As far as I'm concerned, 90% of those things are canon. I say 90% because some stuff from the 40s doesn't age well.
No, it does not.
But other stuff is just weird, and I like weird. Weird is okay. The bad stuff we can actually, that's part of why I wanted to do this book, was to address that stuff.
Yeah, that's something I really glommed onto. Even as a kid, I'd have these books that I wouldn't necessarily be going back and reading Golden Age comics, but I'd have like my Batman book that would go through the history of Batman or Superman, and you'd see those old comics, and it was there was really something about the atmosphere of those. They had like a really cool vibe to them. The characters were much more violent and aggressive. Superman was, Batman was. Everybody kind of knows that, but it feels like a little bit less safe. In addition to being crude and the drawings aren't as cool and nothing's as impactful, the writing's different. But there is something about that world, especially when you're seeing characters you're already familiar with from more modern interpretations. It's weird to see those. You see Batman being so cruel, Superman being cruel.
I was introduced through Marvel's Golden Age reprints. And I wouldn't say, now that I think about it, Marvel made an effort in the early days to kind of tone down some of that stuff. So when they'd reprint stuff, there'd be like editor's notes saying he survived, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But to me, it wasn't about the violence. It was about the fact that the Golden Age didn't have any rules.
Yeah.
They didn't know. So when it comes to like literature, one of my favorite eras of literature is Victorian science fiction, because there wasn't any set standard of how to tell a story yet. And that's why I love Golden Age comic books, because they didn't know how to have a superhero story yet. So they're just like, you want to have a giant floating eye that just yells at people? Sure, let's do it. You know what I mean?
Not?
You want to have a baby that drinks a magic bottle and now he's got superpowers and flies? Go for it.
Yeah, cool.
Like,
have that to me by lunchtime tomorrow, and we'll run with it.
There's a character in Marvel that no one ever talks about that Stan Lee created called the Imp. And he was literally a guy this big who lived in somebody's ear. And whenever they needed to, he'd jump out of the ear and go have adventures. Then you go back and fall asleep in the guy's ear again. And I'm like, what the heck? Why not? And that was the spirit of adventure that I wanted to capture. So I was like, I need that. I mean, admittedly, I pared things down and made it into a more like functional world. But like the idea that anything could happen was the fun part of the 40s,
Yeah, it's cool to see. I'm a big fan of Stardust by Fletcher Hanks.
Oh yeah.
He's a colorful character in of his own life, but you could just
Fletcher Hanks was not a good person by everyone's accounts.
No, it does not seem that way.
Yeah, the fact that he literally had no filter on what he was putting out, it kind of like R. Crumb later on, it just made it interesting. Fletcher Hanks, R. Crumb, Basil Wolverton. These are all artists that just kind of let their imaginations run wild and just said, go with it.
Yeah. And it's weird because in his case, the art's very crude. He could draw much better than that. You've seen some of his other work. It's very polished. And he really was choosing to go, what you see there, you realize is exactly what he just thought would be cool. And there's all this nastiness to it. There's all this weird stuff where he shrinks people's heads and takes them to ice planets. I mean, it would be so strange. And it happens in like 2 panels as well. That's something I loved about those Golden Age comics when I was kind of coming up with my comics based on that. is I didn't have to waste time setting up a lot of things or pasting them like a modern comic. I could just, if this was boring, I could just say, yeah, and they did this, and they're off doing this now, and it really does work, which I think is a cool thing to take care of, or to bring into your stuff. Wanted to point out a comment. Brian Hawkins left here. Brian, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in. About the character designs, which I completely agree with. Some of them are so iconic and work, and some of them are just so strange. And it's actually a lot of fun as I'm planning my next Scarlet Twilight, which is going to be kind of a Crisis on Infinite Earths if it had taken place in the 1940s. I'm designing all these characters.
Ooh, I love all of that. I love it.
It's a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a really cool book, but it's kind of fun to design the ones that are like cool looking based on some of the old character designs, and it's a lot of fun also just to like, hey, I want, like, they were really into like people with striped pants. I'm going to do that. I like doing the bad ones too.
I think that's what's interesting is like what you do with these characters if you're going to do that Crisis on Infinite Earths idea, is because it's like there's just so much
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And somebody, when I was announcing this, somebody goes, hey, if you want, you could use some of my characters too. And I'm like, look, that's cool, but I'm not gonna lie, even though I was planning this as like one issue that could stand by itself, or ideally a 6-issue story altogether, I have hundreds of characters for this universe. and that's just this one, because obviously I have other ideas for other things that I've done, but I'm like, I will be okay. Yeah. And then the idea of just throwing them all together like that, I love it. I brought up some Fletcher Hanks. This is the first appearance of Stardust, the Super Wizard.
And it's the first one. Cool.
Yeah, I just love that he just randomly would just grab people by the spine and squeeze them because, okay, and you guys are evil, so I'm having you float for a while, and it's just, and you know what? You're going to be a skeleton now. It's just, he just does whatever he does because he does it.
Yeah, it is. It's weird because he probably was just out of his mind on some substance when he did it, but it is a very childlike way of thinking. Like when my nephews are telling me a story, it's like, oh, and then this happened and that happened, and it just kind of unfolds that way. So I looked at those and I'm like, boy, that I don't know if that was just idiot savants and he, was doing things that way on purpose, but it just kind of came out that way, or if he said like, I want to tell these stories in a way a kid would respond to. Because so many things are just so weird and bizarre. The fact that Stardust is like twice everyone else's size, is very intentional, and it's never really explained.
No, but he's never got an origin. There's a well, at least not by Fletcher Hanks. Sometimes Fletcher Hanks would leave a story like with Phantoma, and somebody else would come in and try to like organize it a little bit. And but like there was a story once where one bad guy gets shrunk down to just being a head and 2 feet, and it's just like why?
I think I remember that.
And it's just like, you know what? Okay, sure.
There's something so refreshing about, like, I can imagine my nephew telling me a story about like if Stardust was his hero he made up, and he'd just be like, oh yeah, and he's like 3 feet taller than everybody else because that's cool, and it just happens and is never explained. And I don't know, I like that part of these old comics. It's so fun to embrace that stuff and to have some fun with it, whether we're reinterpreting it or taking it seriously, but looking at it from a different angle. It's such a fertile ground. Even I always liked that stuff, but once I started really playing around with it, I was like, geez, there is so much more there than I thought there was.
In that same issue, Fantastic Comics #1, where Stardust shows up, is another Fletcher Hanks story called Space Smith. And this is him trying to be slightly more organized, and it's just, they're just totally nuts. Like
I'm not as in, even though they had some cool villains, I'm not as into because he just didn't go crazy with it.
No, not that. Well, that is where you get the leopard women riding on alligators flying through space and shooting people with lasers from their heads. That comes from Space Smith.
Oh, okay, cool.
So yeah, it's not as out there as Stardust, but it gets out there.
Yeah, Stardust is the one that really. There's another one where it was. Boy, that's unfortunate. You got to be careful with those L's and the I's together.
Yeah, they do that. We're looking at Flick Falcon right now, and sometimes Flick looks a little bit weird when they say his name.
That it does. There was one that he had. I think his name was Big John McClane or Jim
Yeah,
McClane or something
look at
like that.
the lumberjack guy, I
The
think.
lumberjack. He's always like leading revolts against these exploitive lumberyard owners, getting everyone killed but himself.
As
And
you do.
yeah, it's just crazy, but not as much fun.
You know what? I'm flipping through this issue, and I wanted to kind of mention some of these other heroes, if that's all right with you.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Flick Falcon is Flick Falcon in the Fourth Dimension is a great series that I really love. It is honestly as imaginative as anything Fletcher Hanks did, but has the sensibility of like early Steve Ditko that I think people don't. It's an overlooked gem. In fact, I even think he might be there now, but I don't even think he was on the public domain wiki for the longest time. But you see a lot of his books, and he literally will go through, like when he's going through dimensions, there will be like panels of like colors going back and forth, just like the way Steve Ditko would do Doctor Strange issues and stuff. And I really loved the Flick Falcon comic, going through these old comics. I love reading 1940s comics. I do it a lot. To me, it's like, number one, if I'm going to use a character, I'm going to read everything about them. But number two, I may just end up enjoying it anyway. So.
Oh yeah, there's always something to be found there. I think the real fun of it, from a creator perspective, if you're kind of looking to play around with this stuff, is you're kind of seeing people. This is what you mentioned about Victorian sci-fi as well. People are figuring out what works in this art form. Some things look cool, other things don't look cool. Types of stories, and they had, I think, such a good feedback on sales as well that you get all this imitation. I felt like ideas were evolving and getting whittled down into something that really works super fast. And to see that evolution happen, and when it's not just kind of what you respond to as a reader or as a creator, kind of studying this stuff, but you kind of pick up on, okay, this obviously did really well because they're pushing this guy everywhere now. You could see how like an old Captain Marvel, how well that took off because it's just such a well-designed series.
What's interesting is that there's a lot of things that people think of as being later developments that were still around in the 40s or still being developed. Like you mentioned Captain Marvel. A lot of people credit Captain Marvel, Captain Marvel, with being one of the first characters to have like an ongoing story that was like multiple parts. But the truth is there were a lot of characters back in the 40s, early, like 39 and 40, that had ongoing stories. They may not have been quite as grand as the Monster Society of Evil, but like they were still there. So it was still quite intense. And then some of the fun ones I like pointing out is that Spider-Man, famously has his web shooters from his wrist. Well, the first character to have web shooters coming from her wrist was the Spider Queen, who is a public domain character now. And Marvel even used her themselves. She's now a Nazi villain, to be honest. But in Marvel, but like she was the first character to have, a web shooter. And then there was a Golden Age character called Thor, who literally had he was a human who got the hammer of Thor, and that was what allowed him to get Thor's power. Thor granted him his power, and he would literally throw the hammer, and then it would come back to him. And like he did all the stuff that like Thor would do later, plus other stuff. He also grew to giant size and all kinds of weird stuff because it was the 40s. But the point is like a lot of things we associate with later comics were there in these early ones. It's really nuts.
Oh yeah, it's crazy to watch this art form like kind of take its first steps and learn to run really quickly.
Here, look at this Flick Falcon comic and tell me
that
isn't Steve.
That is very Ditko, absolutely.
Yeah,
very cool.
Look at that. Look at the colors and the shapes that are going through there. Ditko, and then even the shadows is another thing Ditko liked playing with. This Ditko would have been a teenager, or see how old would he have been? Actually, no, he would have been like 10 when this came out. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did read this. So
it's not hard to imagine. And another thing I love, this is me kind of putting on my artist hat. In most cases, these are obviously all from scans of old comics.
Yeah, and by the way, for everybody, we're looking at comicbookplus.com, which is a place you can legally read public domain comics. So,
I was hoping that would be a legal version. I figured.
Yeah, I'm not going to promote anything illegal, but
since most of this is public domain. Yeah.
Yeah, I am also a high school teacher. Yeah, everything on this website is public domain.
All right, and something about. No, I was going to say you get a really garish yellow sometimes, especially on the covers. And certainly when they reprint some of these, they clean them up and they get kind of ugly looking, in my opinion. But when you look at these newsprint scans, you've got the a lot of this is the fading. It happens with
Yeah,
time, but
it's
I think
age.
a lot of it was kind of intentional, and they knew how this would soak into the paper, you know, into some regard, and it looks really good, even though these pages are not that well designed from a graphics, you know, a layout perspective, and the way we're used to seeing things now. Um, they always just hang together, and I think a lot of that's the color, and you know, whether you've got panel layouts that don't exactly work or just aren't that dynamic, there's such a great look to these things that I'm always trying to bring into my stuff.
That's actually something I brought up in a recent TikTok that I did, where I was talking about the color, why the colors are so bright and distinct, and why there seems to be such a limited amount of colors, is because of the color process. When you hear that term four color comics, they literally was just CMYK, and how much can they combine these things?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and that's what's really cool is, you know, I think the sort of, how do I think of the way to say this? I think people's or idea of what these old comics look like is it's all dot patterns, and it's kind of like
yeah, the Ben Day stuff.
Liechtenstein pop art, but it's actually not always like that. If you got certain colors, it would just fully print that color, and you would just have the texture of the paper.
Yep.
And then you get the dots for, you know, like the skin tone or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where it's, you know, the red kind of taken down.
Anything where
And
it's in between colors.
yeah,
Look at that
yeah.
panel.
So you
Tell me
get,
that's not Steve Ditko right there.
no, it absolutely is. It's interesting to see, and I think this is true of Fletcher Hanks to whatever extent. A lot of what he did was really thought out and intentional. A lot of these guys were really looking at what makes a page look cool, or what they could do with this art form that you wouldn't necessarily see in a Sunday strip, where things I think need to be a lot more literal if they weren't humor comics, and you know, just having fun with it. And I think a lot of that was probably a product of, I joked earlier, like, oh yeah, get that to me by lunchtime tomorrow. These things had to be done in like a day or two sometimes, so you kind of could get away with a lot, I think. And it's great when you see artists taking advantage of that, having fun with it, and trying to deliver something to the readers that, you know, that will keep them coming back. And I think that's something we kind of have in common with those older creators as we're doing Kickstarters and stuff. Is
Oh yeah.
you really have to put on that other hat where you say, okay, what's going to keep somebody coming back to my next campaign? What's going to make this really fun? And it's really true when you're coming up with your own properties, which, I mean, you're using other characters, but that's your book and it's your story, and it's very unique.
Well, that's the thing. Using other characters, it depends. Like, a lot of people think, well, it's public domains, that means you can't own it. Well, think of this: Santa Claus is public domain, right?
Mhm.
But anytime you watch, like, you know, the Guardians, what was the Guardians movie that came out several years ago with Jack Frost?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know the name of it.
But Guardians of something, I can't remember right now. But I think it was maybe just called the Guardians. It was originally going to be called the Guardians of Childhood, but they changed the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they have their own Santa Claus in there, you know, and that's a distinct Santa Claus for that movie. Nobody else can use that version of Santa Claus. So there's nothing wrong with taking a public domain character and then doing your own spin on it. Where I do err in the side of caution myself is I purposely try to avoid characters that are prominently used by the major publishers. So, for example, Blue Beetle, famously in our circles, is known to be mostly public domain, but because of how prominent Blue Beetle is in DC, most people defer from using Blue Beetle, even if they're not going to put the name on the title of the magazine. We still avoid doing it because it's just kind of a precaution, I guess. And I don't see the reason to kick that hornet's nest, so to speak. You know, so I'm like,
me neither.
So
absolutely not.
So yeah, so like Stardust, a lot of people have used Stardust, and if Stardust shows up in Marvel tomorrow, it's not going to change a thing. But because DC had purposely, purchased, Charlton and some of these other companies, they intended to own those characters.
Yeah.
So it's like, it gets tricky sometimes. We were talking right before we recorded. I'm not a lawyer, but I do teach about copyright to my high school students, and I give them the bare minimum basics of it and where to be cautious. And literally one of the questions is, if a company says your thing is too close to theirs, what should you do? And the suggestion is just change it to avoid a lawsuit. And that wasn't even something I wrote. Somebody else wrote that. I'm like, but I agree with that. It's like, if you have the money for an amazing lawyer, go for it. But otherwise.
No, I agree with that. And that's something, like I said, my new book, I'm kind of I want to use these characters as close to what they were as I can. But I'm also being cautious about a lot of things, because I think that, especially cases of We were talking about the Black Terror a little bit, for example. While he is public domain, there is, I think, a little bit of disagreement on whether he is actually public domain, but he's been used in a lot of
So
things going back 20, 30 years as public domain.
with,
And
let me touch base on that real quick before we continue.
sure.
Prefacing again by saying I'm not a lawyer. One of the aspects of copyright and trademark, for that matter, but mainly talking about copyright, is the concept of defending your material.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, Starbucks, they are extremely litigious. They will go after anybody that does anything even remotely like a Frappuccino. And they have lessened up a little bit over the years, mainly because some really big name people have parodied them and they can't really sue Saturday Night Live. But like famously, they sued Kieran Dwyer, who is a really prominent artist in the comic industry. And he lost a case that by all rights he shouldn't have lost, but he couldn't afford a lawyer and they had a bunch of lawyers, and that's what it came down to. But part of that is defending the character. So, for example, Marvel over the years has sent out cease and desist letters to people when they publish a book that it's something Marvel. Even though they don't own the trademark on that, nor can they say to own the copyright on the word Marvel, they will go out and defend it. And even if it's a case where likely you would win and they would lose, they still need to do it so that the next time it happens, they can go to the judge and say, look, we have been actively defending this. So we would like to continue defending this now in this more important case. And I say that because the Black Terror has shown up a lot. Famously, he's in the Dynamite series, which is Alex Ross designed characters. So he redesigned the Black Terror and does use them. And they have a trademark on this logo of Black Terror. But Black Terror has also shown up from other companies. This is a Black Terror that was published in the 90s. I actually have this in my back room over there with my stacks of comics. And it's called The Black Terror. And you'll notice it is a distinctly redesigned costume. But there have been many different versions of the Black Terror over the years that other people have done. And whoever may claim to own Net or Now has not actually pursued any of these. So if they were to pursue one against you, it would be very well. Again, if you had a lawyer, it would be pretty hell for that lawyer to be able to say,
how the Kickstarter does.
They have not gone and defended this character, so it is definitively public domain. You know what I mean? Now that being said, definitely don't use it the way that Alex Ross uses it. Don't do that. And because Alex Ross has a comic book called Black Terror, even though there have been other comics called that before, I would also defer to that one. Even though I don't think Alex Ross has claimed the sole right to use the term Black Terror, it would be confusing. So I wouldn't try to risk that. Anything that could confuse the market is something that judges will look at.
That's another point in my research that I've noticed is the reasonable amount of confusion you might expect to create is a big factor.
There are four main factors the judges look at. It's what is the nature of the work? Is it something that could be? Are you doing parody? Is it something that is part of education? Is it satire? I mean, not satire. Is it critique? What is the purpose of it? Did you change it like it was one thing and now it's a different thing now? What is the amount of it that you're using? And of course, the effect on the market, which is what we're talking about right now, which is could it confuse the audience or could it affect the market one way or the other? One thing I always heard is, especially in the early days of YouTube, creators would be like, I have fair use because I'm not making money off this. That's not what that means. The only way you can have fair use is if a judge said in a case, I grant you fair use, basically. So really all you can say is, I have a likely case for fair use. And I think that's fair, but you can't say I have fair use. It's very, very tricky. But my point on Black Terror is that one especially, it hasn't been defended. Now, the opposite, though, is, say, Zorro and the Green Llama. The people that claim to own Zorro, well, that's a specious claim right there, they have been extremely litigious over the years, suing anybody they could, saying they own the trademark to Zorro or they own the copyright to later versions of Zorro. But in more recent cases, they've been losing. So it's like that's kind of going out the window. And then for Green Llama, I think a lot of people assumed Green Llama was public domain because some of his adventures are public domain. But it's like the Max Fleischer cartoons of Superman are public domain, but that doesn't mean Superman's public domain.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, well, the cartoon version is, yes, so that means you can publish the cartoon, but the character is still under copyright. And so when Alex Ross, my understanding on this, I need to look into it, but when Alex Ross wanted to use Green Llama and didn't know he was not public domain, they contacted the family and they gave him permission. So he continued using Green Llama. Same thing with the Tarzan books and the John Carter books that are being published right now. Those books were initially published without permission of the family because, again, the original versions of those characters are public domain. And then the family and the comic book company got into a negotiation, and they eventually came to an agreement. So those books went from being published public domain-ish to being fully licensed. So, that can happen,
Well, it's interesting stuff. And there's been so many Black Terrors. I think even Alan Moore used them in the Tom Strong books.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was very tied into to the previous continuity, which is very cool to see as well.
I believe that. I want to look that up. See if that's it. Is that on there somewhere?
Yeah, that was called Terra Obscura.
There he is. Yeah, look at that.
So it was drawn, but yeah, I love that. I love that whole series.
That was a cool redesign. I like that. And see, that was part of my goal with my comics was to do a redesign of characters that would make them distinctly mine in the same sense that the Watchmen characters were essentially Charlton characters that were redesigned. That was the initial goal there. And of course, the Watchmen situation is a whole other situation when it comes to contracts. I'm sorry. I feel like I rambled a bit.
No worries. This is it's interesting to me, obviously, but I've seen, and a lot of this comes to the fact I think we're on Facebook groups that talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have seen a lot more of these public domain characters being used, so I think it is of interest to people because I've seen a lot of nothing is set in stone, obviously, until a judge decides your thing is okay or not okay. But I've seen a lot of people talk about this, other people argue with them, and I think that it's a pretty valuable conversation as more and more people are using these characters. And I think it's also kind of gotten a lot more visibility when people are doing Winnie the Pooh stuff or stuff that's kind of coming out now every few years. A few new things drop and people are sorting it out. People are like, I can't wait to do my Superman story in 10 years. And it's like, good luck with that.
Well, see, my thing is here's the thing. I see this as filing off the serial numbers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if Superman was fully public domain, I would still be very hesitant to do a Superman story straightforwardly. Not because I'd be worried about being sued, but because I'd rather have my own character. Take a look at, for example, Twilight, and for that matter, even 50 Shades of Grey. Both of these things basically started out as writers kind of doing their fanfic characters, and then they just filed off the serial numbers and made it their own. So for my comic, I wanted to tell a brand new story, but I also wanted to have the readers immediately understand what's happening. So I'm not going to go and explain every character. Yes, if you want to, you can read all their backstories, but let's be blunt. This guy right here, the Yankee Doodle Jones, his original origin is that there was this scientist who did an experiment, and he got this blonde guy that was superpowers injected him, so he was super strong. And then Nazis break in and kill the scientist, and now there's only the one hero. Sounds very familiar.
A lot of that going around.
Yeah, but here's the thing: his origin's different from Steve Rogers because there was no scrawny kid in this version. In this version, there were 3 wounded veterans that volunteered their bodies to science, and he chopped them up into pieces and sewed them into one person. But he doesn't look like a Frankenstein. He looks like an attractive blond guy. Literally,
worked out well there.
Literally, we go from one panel of we took their bodies apart. The next panel, all right, Doc, I'm ready. God damn.
Oh my goodness.
So I took that character and I said, all right, I like this design, this concept, but the costume's ugly. So I redesigned it a bit. I lowered the number of stripes and then I reorganized the stars. I kept the Garrison cap because I just felt that was needed. And I said, and I went to Kerry Callan, who does some really great 1940s parody comics, and said, can you redraw these characters? So he took my designs and redesigned them. The other characters I had in this batch here, I also have the Purple Zombie. I definitely wanted to have a super strong character, and then I read this guy. He's basically the Hulk. Let's be honest, but his adventures are insane. Literally, in the issues that he's in, let's see. He first his creator dies, but then the creator is alive, so he killed the other creator, thinking that the creator was dead. But then he found out that the other creator had been paid by the mafia and by Nazi sympathizers, so he went around and killed those guys, which caused the cops to arrest him and put him to death in the electric chair. Mind you, he had already previously been put to death in the electric chair. So they electrocuted him, didn't kill him. So then the governor pardoned him, sort of, and then he became a time traveler, and it's insane. So I was like, I want this guy to be in my book. And then for I wanted a Thor or Wonder Woman type character, so I got Farah, who only ever had 2 pages ever. And I said, I'm going to redesign these characters to be something more for my book, still distinctly what they were. And that was the idea. And that was kind of the fun of going through these. You want your own Superman character? There's a ton of Superman characters out there.
Yeah.
Famously in circles of comic book historians, Superman appeared in 1938, right? In 1939, Wonder Comics came out with Wonder Man. And he was also faster than a speeding bullet and could leap tall buildings in single bound. And nothing short of a bursting shell could break his skin. And DC said that was a little bit too on the nose. So DC sued, and it actually went to court. And Will Eisner later on claimed that he had told the judge, yep, they told me to copy Superman, so I did. But if you read the transcript, he didn't say that. But nowadays there's a dozen Superman parodies or knockoffs in any comic book company.
Yeah.
Marvel's got a dozen Superman.
The Hyperion, and it's much closer. I mean, Captain Marvel, I think, is the biggest
and that
lawsuit. They had the biggest, I guess, fallout.
Yes, that had the biggest, because they were the most successful. They had the most to fall.
Yeah.
But so basically, what I did is I just said, you know what, I'm going to take Wonder Man, who is literally sued for being a Superman knockoff. I'm going to take Black Fury and Blue Circle, who are very bald-faced Batman knockoffs, and the Silver Streak, who I'll get into in a second. And I said, I'm going to redesign these guys and make them even closer to the originals. Make them even closer, because we can do that nowadays, and it's fun. I mean, they're not literally Superman, Batman, and the Flash, but it's like I can have fun with this. By the way, Silver Streak, I want to touch on that one for a second. You will read several places online that says Silver Streak could fly. Silver Streak flies in the Alex Ross
covers. He is.
But if you read the original comics, Silver Streak didn't fly. Silver Streak Hulk jumped. And Silver Streak at one point grabs an arrow and goes with it. Now, there are a few panels where Silver Streak will dive and then somehow change up speed. But those are exceptions, not the rule. He didn't fly. So I was actually hesitant to use that character because I really wanted a speedster character. And I was like, well, if he flies, I really don't want to use him. But I read all of his appearances. He doesn't fly,
I did the same thing because I want to use him kind of, I'm using him a little bit differently than the other ones. But, definitely I kind of went for him because I love how he looks. And I wanted to treat him as mainly a Flash type character.
That's what he is.
For this, the purposes Flash is kind of traditionally served in these big crossovers, and that's what I want from him. So I'm changing the name because it always just bothered me that he didn't have really any silver in his costume in a big way.
Yeah. Well, I say if you're going to keep the name, make him more silvery, I think.
Yeah.
That was originally going to be my intention, but the more I thought about it, in fact, I was originally going to have like a silver streak and a red streak, and I was going to have different colored streaks. Cool. But after the time, I was like, they're just the streak. It was just easier that way.
I noticed that when you use this in your comic, you shorten it to just the streak, which I struggled. I literally have a document somewhere just making him any color I could think of would work.
I did the same
with something that implied speed.
And
I probably settled on Red Roadster, but I'm not in love with it.
No, I like Roadster. I don't know about Red Roadster. That does feel weird. But there's also another character called Red Robin, Red Robbins, rather, with 2 B's and an S, who was a speedster character, although the artist was not good at drawing speed. so the character would literally just look like a regular run, but he catches up with a car. So he's a speedster, but just not good art. And he's going to be also, like, I have a bunch of characters that we referenced in this issue. Red Robbins is definitely going to be referenced in this issue. But the thing is that I'm going to get off on a side topic for a quick second. So when talking about Red Robbins and the streak, both comics had a lot of racism in them, because you cannot address 40s comics without addressing that racism was there. And many of the Silver Streak's adventures were like his origin had a yogi wearing a turban who gave him powers, and it was very odd. And then he got his sidekick Falcon there from a Middle Eastern racist stereotype. And then his second sidekick, the Meteor, or also called what else he called? He got,
he had I've seen two different names.
Yeah, two different names.
Mercury.
Mercury and Meteor. Mercury and Meteor. The two names. His first appearance was with a Yellow Peril bad guy, which is a racist stereotype of Asian people. So they're all really bad. So Red Robins had a sidekick who was essentially a minstrel show character, a black character, who was a joke. But in one of that character's first appearances, while that character is written that way and has all that same dialogue, that Amos and Andy dialogue, the story takes place in Harlem, and everyone else in Harlem is a fully rounded person. And they're actually, literally the people of Harlem tell Red Robins, this is our problem, we're going to deal with it internally. And then he still helps them out because he's the hero in the 40s, whatever. And Silver Streak, I was literally going through Silver Streak comics, and I just was blown away when I saw one of his issues. This new writer-artist took over Silver Streak. And oh my God, in his very first story, Silver Streak and Mercury are reading through a newspaper, and he's like, Black people are being lynched in the South? This isn't the America I grew up with. So they run to the South and literally go after a stand-in for the KKK and save a Black family from being lynched. Like, I've never seen another white comic from the 40s that, like, they would have the KKK as bad guys, but they were never dealing with them in the context of racism. And these guys were head on saying, this is happening. This is what a lynching looks like. And I was like, wow. And then the second issue by that same writer-artist was about teaching an evil capitalist that you have to let the workers unionize because that's the true American way.
That happens a lot, or things like that happen a lot in like your early Superman comics. A lot of plant owners, a lot of landlords, things like that. And he dangles them over a balcony and says, you better do right by these people. Exactly. And they tend to do it. And it kind of goes to one of the reasons in researching all this stuff, I think Captain Marvel was so popular is it was one of the first ones to really embrace, you have a superheroes. A lot of times you wouldn't get really good supervillains. You'd get capitalists. You get a lot of gangsters. I do like gangsters, but like they didn't quite say, you could just see them figuring out, wait, people really like, a villain that is like the hero. And it took a long time for that to catch on and be used all the time.
I also like pointing out is a lot of 1940s comics, especially the anthologies. There'd often be one story in the anthology which was starring the villain. So then you'd have like, a series of like 20 issues where the villain is there. And for like 5 issues, this hero would fight him. And for 5 issues, this hero would fight him. But the villain was the main character. It's just such an interesting concept that we don't have anymore.
But I haven't seen any of those. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, there's Landor, the monster maker. And there's obviously the Claw, who is...
Oh, I have seen a video about Landor.
I just posted a video about the Claw recently. I posted a video about the Ghost, who was the guy who fought the Claw, and on TikTok, which follow me on TikTok at Kevin Garcia _com.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I just posted a video about that. Actually, no, I didn't post it technically. Comic Strike posted it. He asked me to do a video about that character, and I said, sure, I'll do a video about that character. But I warned him in advance, it's gonna have to involve racism because the Ghost, who's got a pretty fun design, he looks like Papyrus from Undertale, but he only exists to fight the Claw, and the Claw only exists to be a racist caricature. Modern day creators who have tried to reinvent the Claw have done some great jobs. There's one artist I found, I wish I could remember who he was, but he redesigned the Claw with the concept, like one of the Claw had several origins, but in one of his origins, he was definitely an alien. So he redesigned him with that in mind, and he was completely inhuman. There wasn't anything remotely stereotype about him. But the problem is he's still based in that, and that has to be acknowledged,
Yeah. And so to ask you about World's War comics a little bit, as an overview, you're kind of treating all these stories as if they did happen more or less when they were published. And we're looking at this generations later, seeing, I think, descendants, or in some cases, the same heroes. Tell us a little bit of the plot setup for this issue.
So this issue is primarily about the survivors of World War II, either because of time travel, because of long lived or immortality or other, looking back on their adventures. Some looking back on them with glory. Some look up. In fact, I can show you some of that. I've got some flashback scenes going on. Some look back on them like all excited. Some look back at them kind of sad. But it's always this idea of like there was more happening back then that they found it so exciting. And then for the modern day heroes, it's kind of like a, you did these adventures. They were so cool. And part of my goal in that is to show that there was more to the, last great war than the great part, and so that's kind of what I wanted to get at with that. So I have like one of my characters here is, I call him Dr. Science, and he's based on the 1950 character Captain Science. And who was a time traveler and a scientist. But I have my guy as a time traveler who literally is, while talking about the war, saying, hold on, I got to go fight in the battle of the Bulge. Give me a second. He goes back in time to fight that. He comes back. All right, I'm done. And it's like, wait, but you already knew what was going to happen. It's like, yeah, but it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there. So I had to be there. It's time travel. You deal with it. So that's kind of the goal there. But also there are going to be little things that if you know more about the characters will mean more to you. Like, I'm not going to explain these guys right now, but the purple zombie had an army of robot skeletons. So whenever you see him in the flashbacks, there are all these robot skeletons nearby because, he's a purple zombie and he's got robot skeletons.
So, I did mean to ask you about those because I was like, boy, those, obviously you just see them, dressed up as soldiers. You're like, there's a story there.
There is a story there. And the original story is fun, but it's not, it's well planned out, but not well. No, it's not even planned out. How can I put it? They literally were writing by the seat of their pants. You could tell that every single page was like, oh, what do we do now? But at the same time, like it was clearly, there was such a good germ of an idea there that you could develop more with that purple zombie. And when I post videos about it, somebody would respond, oh, I want to do my own purple zombie video comic book now. And I'm like, go for it. People have asked me, I literally had somebody ask me the other day, so-and-so is doing a public domain comic book. Aren't you worried that it's like competition for yours? And I'm like, no, the more people use these characters, the more they become known to the public. And the more people are like, oh, another Black Terror story. I want to read about Black Terror. What's this guy doing with them? You know what I mean? It gets exciting that way. You mentioned earlier about growing up with these old stories. One of my favorite things as a kid was growing up with the Marvel handbooks and reading through those and learning about those stories.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird to think of if you can get Marvel Unlimited or the DC equivalent and really go back and read a lot of these. But, you're probably a little younger than me, but, when you were growing up decades ago, you'd have these books about Batman that would just have a page or two here or there of this story or that story. It was all really secondhand. It was all very piecemeal, and it was hard to find stuff. And it, in a lot of ways, that did two things. A, it was really cool to find something new when you could find it, and there weren't as many comic shops, so you couldn't just go. You certainly couldn't go online and get things either. But you also had this weird space where you know a little bit about something that looked cool, that you were interested in, that intrigued you, and you would just kind of, I think everybody does this, especially if you're creative. You start thinking of things on your own, like, oh, I wonder what the rest of that story was. I wonder what the next appearance was. And you kind of come up with these stories of your own, sort of halfway.
Exactly.
Or at least your mind goes to work on them. And that is something you don't really have now when you can just like jump on the Black Terror's Wikipedia page and learn everything about him.
But again, I highly recommend start with the Wikipedia page and then go read the original comics. Yeah. Like read a character that you're like, this guy sounds fun, and then go read those original comics.
And I really love this image. It's great design, and it's a great look at all these characters as well.
Freddie Lopez Jr. is this amazing artist out of San Antonio who did. I met him years ago at a convention, and I just fell in love with his work. And I knew that as soon as I got around to doing this book, I was like, I have to get him on this book because it's just his stuff is just so good. Where are his things though? I thought it was there. Huh. I will have to find it later then. I was going to bring it up right now. But he did some new pieces recently.
Oh, cool.
And let me bring it up in a second. I'll close this for now while I do that. But yeah, Freddie Lopez Jr., I just fell in love with his work. He does this really great sci-fi and fantasy. I saw him do like a Transformers comic. I saw a cover painting rather.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of like Star Wars. And I just like he had to do the covers. I just knew it. Yeah, Kamazats is a great comic, and it's also using both the public domain and telling a story that is something that was something he was inspired by, with this kind of concept of the hero in the dark. And it's like, what was I going to say? Kamazats, by being mythology, is public domain, but his version of it is going to be something unique. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Cool. I also wanted to bring up Sean's comment again. Thank you for leaving it. Looking forward to backing both these great Golden Age projects, which is awesome to hear. Thank you. Great artwork on this. Let me bring that up here.
Yeah.
So very cool.
Yeah, Freddie didn't even let me know about these drawings. He just posted them on Instagram and said, I was so excited about this story that I kept drawing the characters. And I was like, okay. So he did a few more. And I was like, all right, cool. It's cool to see. So I asked him, I said, is it okay if I use these guys to promote different things? And he was like, yeah, go for it. And I can't find. I'm trying to find this version of it, but I can't find it right now. But the point is, like, he just wanted to do it, and I was like, you know what? It's cool. I don't know if that counts as the first fan art for this book. This, by the way, is David Lujan. He's another really great artist. And I asked him for a lot of these, I had a very specific thing in mind. So, for example, Gary Callan, I said specifically, can you make these guys look like it's a 1940s propaganda comic book? You know, like Batman or Superman saying, buy war bonds and defeat the Germans, you know, that kind of a thing. And then he did this, and it looks totally like that. In fact, when he first drew it, they were frowning and angry. And I was like, it's the 40s comics. And he's like, I can have them smiling? It's like, yeah, go for it.
So, Batman will be smiling on those covers where he's like at the machine gun fighting in the Pacific, and he's got
just like
smile on his face. Robin's right there in the war zone too. He's
beating in the bullets. I know exactly what cover you're talking about. And then for Marcus Newsom, I told him, make it ready for the 90s and made these characters look more like because these are my legacy characters, the ones that are not the ones that were alive in the 40s. They're the modern versions of these characters. And then for this one, I just told David, I love your art. Do what you want. And I was like, wow, I couldn't believe what he ended up doing.
I really like that image. I love the blue lighting.
I don't know what's going on with your eyes, but I love it. Yeah. And he added all this overdone Ben-Day dots.
Yeah, really. This is a lot of times I was kind of referring to this earlier. People think of like, oh yeah, it was just like art today, but with, less detail and the dot pattern everywhere.
Yeah.
Which A, wasn't true. And B, what I really like about this is he's taking some of those elements and not necessarily trying to make this look like it was from the 40s, which is fun too. But he's like, all right, I'm going to use the dots in some respect. It's not going to be the same way they did back then. And then he's bringing in lighting you'd see in a lot of graphic posters from that time, not necessarily comic book stuff. Oh, and you got the offset colors.
Yeah. Now, Gary Callan was trying to do the coloring like it was in that time. So like where David is doing it artistically, he's just like adding dots to look cool. Gary Callan's like, and I didn't even ask him to. I just thought I wanted to look like it's the 40s, and he literally I couldn't have asked for more. Like he literally has it offset colors, and you can see where things are just ever so slightly not filled in the correct way. And I'm just like, it's perfect. It's exactly what I intended.
Yeah, I was going back and forth on whether I was going to do that in the next Scarlet Twilight, and I kind of decided it was going to be really selective. Give me an excuse not to be that clean, and but I wasn't going to like across the board do the colors in a way where I could just take it all and offset it, easily. Just like whenever I think it would look cool to do it. But it looks great there.
The main interior art is going to be by Ronaldo Garza, who did a comic book called Tank McGregor, which is a really fun book. It's like calls it a 1980s sci-fi romp, and that's exactly what it is. And then when I told him, like, I wasn't sure how to do the coloring, he's like, I worked with this color artist, Michael Woods. And I said, you know what? This is great. This is Michael Woods. I took off the line art just so we could see the coloring. And it's beautiful. So we have our legacy characters there fighting with the purple zombie. And so it's just, I really love how this whole project's coming out.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's really tough to make a composition like that work. I'm finding this is a lot of things where I've got a lot of characters on the page and they all have different colors. Sometimes those colors don't always look cool together. But if you look at, say, old Justice Society comics, they had every color in the spectrum on that team. They do manage to make it work. It looks really cool.
I will tell you that I redesigned all these characters myself. So what I would do is I would go through and decide, what works for these characters, how they're going to balance off each other.
Mm-hmm.
And in my script, I'm fairly detailed most of the time with like where characters are going to be. This is all my art you're looking at right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly detailed most of the time with where the characters are going to be standing and how, because there's often either a further meaning to it or the next page is going to have them doing a thing that leads off of that. Now, I will say Ronaldo didn't follow all of that exactly, but where he changed it, I enjoyed it. So I was like, keep going, keep doing these changes. They work out.
Yeah, really. I love what he did with your Wonder Woman analog in that fan art piece that you brought up.
Oh, the one with the lighting. What's really funny?
Because he brought in some red and some yellow that just complements that perfectly.
The first time he added some more color to her costume, which I think looked really nice. But also the first time he drew her flying, and I was like, I literally labeled which characters can fly, and I was like, this character's not one of them. But I was like, but the drawing's so good, I'm just going to say she's jumping. And he's like, no, I'll change it. And then for the art he did without telling me, he has all this electricity everywhere. And I'm like, she doesn't have electricity powers, but I don't care. It looks beautiful.
It's a striking image. Absolutely.
There is actually a power that wouldn't come up in this issue, but would come up in the second issue that should have a visual representation. And you know what? I think I'm going to write down to have it look like electricity because it just looks so cool. But yeah, exactly. And you can see from my drawing, I took a character. Well, one of my big things is some of these characters were white, but clearly shouldn't have been. So I made her a woman of color. She's from ancient Africa and that kind of stuff. And it's like, let's just address that. But then I also added features to her that are a little bit more Egyptian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my take on that, in my sort of, I guess we'll call it headcanon, is they were that, the stuff. I think that's the best way to approach it and say, like, what, in my version of this, they were from that part of the world. Yeah, it just didn't come through in the art somehow, and you don't want to like erase that stuff. But I also think, and this depends on the tone of your story. In a lot of cases, I think in a book like Watchmen, which takes what was kind of a golden age, generation of characters, and it looks back at their flaws, and they were all these ugly people.
See, that's the thing. I don't want to deconstruct. I want to reevaluate.
Yeah, and I found that that's something. Even in the first Scarlet Twilight, there were things that I thought. It didn't go down the road in a big way of some of these plot points, but I'm like, this brings up parts of World War II that I can refer to maybe in dialogue or exposition or captions without showing in a way that's just not that dark. It doesn't get into anything that actually happened, but it kind of brings to mind imagery that I just thought, like, this isn't the right thing to show in a picture in this story. And I think it's not necessarily a matter of like erasing things, but you really have to be concentrating on the flow of your story. And I think that determines a lot of how much and in what way you can engage with some of these things.
I 100% agree. And like you said, not everything, deconstruction was a big thing with comics in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I still think it serves a purpose, but somebody asked me the other day about The Boys, and I'm like, I'm not a big fan of it. I don't feel like it serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. Like, you can have dark stories to be dark. I have no problem with that. But The Boys seems to more like just dark because they think dark is funny. And I'm like, all right, but that's not for me. Whereas like Brat Pack was extremely dark, but it was also making a point about sidekicks that was not made in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. Watchmen is very, very dark, but it's making a point about the golden age that wasn't made in the 1980s. I'm not trying to deconstruct superheroes. I'm trying to kind of, like I said, reevaluate them. There may be some deconstruction in that, but not to the level of Watchmen, where they're just falling apart.
Sean, just back to your project.
I literally, I looked down at my phone right now. It just said new backer, and I was like, all right, cool. Why not?
Awesome. I like that. Mine doesn't tell me that. I would get very addicted to that dopamine rush of affirmation there.
It is a good one.
Yeah. So, and anybody else watching this on YouTube now or later, the links for Kevin's project are in the description. Take you over to the Kickstarter page. You can also have links down there to Archetypes, which is Joey and our Geek Collective magazine that's the Wizard homage sort of thing. And you also see a link to the pre-launch of the next Scarlet Twilight book, which is kind of an intro to Cobalt Crisis, which is the next big chapter. But I'm kind of doing an anthology that's going to be about 40, 50 pages that uses some public domain characters, uses a little bit of Scarlet Twilight stuff, and kind of leads you into this big sort of epic crossover event that's the next big chapter of Scarlet Twilight. So you can see all those in the descriptions below.
And I also I actually bought www.worldswarcomics.com a long time ago.
Nice.
Basically, when I first had this idea, I was like, "Oh, I really want to run with this." So I went ahead and bought the URL. And I've had some people say that the title's confusing. They want to say World War.
Mm-hmm. I'm guilty of that myself.
Yeah. So yeah, crossover with Kevin's book. I like that idea. You know,
well, that assumes any of my characters survive their next adventure.
And
so
see, that ties to the name of my book. The whole point of it is Worlds War Comics, and that's actually where I want to head with that. So crossovers would be fun.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason I wanted to bring in. I was kind of in a position coming up with my project. The next version of it was Scarlet Twilight did really well. My other book that I'm really into is called kind of an 80s science fiction book. Called August. I really love doing, but kind of felt like the time was right to do more Scarlet Twilight next instead of that. So I was kind of forced to kind of look at this and say, hey, what's a satisfying next chapter of this that gives you what you wanted in the first one, but remixes some things that are fun in other comics, and that kind of is what I settled on. So I kind of wanted to bring in these characters to kind of fulfill that function where you end up with characters from parallel universes and like the Secret Wars from the 2010s, or obviously in Crisis on Infinite Earths, we have these universes colliding.
Oh yeah.
So that was kind of my entry point to it. And it was really cool, to be able to use that. And it's like I said, I think there is so much to story, I guess, fruitful territory for stories to explore it the way you're doing it. The way I'm doing it, I've seen a lot of other people, go really interesting directions with these older characters, or even stuff inspired by them. That is very awesome to see.
There's a great multiverse story that is heavily, I like that. Somebody backing Archetypes too.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
There's a heavily overlooked story that does a really great job at showing a multiverse crossover that is, I wish Marvel would reprint sometime, and that is the Avengers Ultra Force crossover, which is not, it's not one that's on most people's radar, but it is very well written. And it came out, I think, just before the Avengers JLA crossover, which is probably the better remembered one, and definitely the better overall. But like, it does the Amalgam thing before Amalgam did, and it does the Avengers JLA mixed history thing before Avengers JLA did, and it does them both very, very well. And it even shows some other realities that don't make any sense. There's one reality that it shows where Thor is a Christian hero and he's throwing a cross and then catching the cross back again. It's really great. It's just nuts. It's nuts. And
that's crazy. I'm a big Ultra Force or Ultraverse fan. I'm not sure what they exactly.
It also has the somewhat apocryphal appearance of the seventh Infinity Gem. Because that's always a big question. Yeah. So Sean there says, I love Golden Age stories. And that's my thing is I love those stories. I just have a great desire to see more of that. One thing I find interesting, you talk about being in the public domain Facebook groups, is sometimes I'll see fans that are saying, well, I love the Golden Age story, but I can't believe when they brought them back, they changed them. And sometimes the change could just be that they're in the present. And it's like, you're never going to please everybody, but I think whenever you draw attention to these characters, it makes people want to go back and see the older ones. So I remember when the Peter Jackson's King Kong came out, people were like, oh, it's a horrible movie, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, you know what? Whatever you think of the movie, it made them re-release the original King Kong on DVD. Yeah. And I'm proud of that. And I enjoyed it for the most part. I think it should have been 2 movies, not 1. But I like that it re-released a lot of the older King Kong stuff. So I have a DVD collection that only exists because that movie came out, So I love bringing back the Golden Age.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's certainly been a lot of DC's Golden Age is a great graphic novel. I think it was the 4 issue.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
There's certainly been people who've gone back to this stuff and done really cool things with it, but to my mind, there's just so much more
Oh yeah.
um, that you can get out of these. And my first Scarlet Twilight was kind of just taking the ideas of those adventures and certainly a lot of the visuals and just trying to reinterpret that in a way that would be satisfying from a story perspective, but also from a I guess I would call it like a reaction to modern comics. And like, am I going to go down the deconstruction path? And I would play with that. So it's kind of about taking the ideas in those old stories. I think also maybe the ideas as comic fans we have about things that have happened since and comics are being produced now, and mixing that together and finding cool moments within that. I think there's always going to be something really valuable about that. I think there's always going to be something really interesting about it. I think we are more than maybe other hobbies, if that's what we want to call comics or being a comic fan or certainly a creator. Yeah, we are very focused on our history. I mean, people get so into continuity and things like that, that I think there is kind of a desire, at least in this genre, to focus on that. I think there's a good reason and a really great argument to be made for making that part of the story.
I 100% agree. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm doing what I do.
Same, likewise. So I'm gonna kind of wrap us up here. I'll throw the Worlds of War comics up here one more time. Oops, sorry. Let me
Yep.
get that.
And yeah, like I said earlier,
11 more days to go.
yep. I have a TikTok where I've been posting a lot of videos about the characters individually and about some of their background. I also posted several videos that were just about the original Golden Age adventures of some of these characters.
Cool.
So like I go into heavy detail on the Purple Zombies' wild adventures. We haven't even mentioned the Mars-Jishin, who's on the top of the page there. She is, by all accounts right now, the very first female superhero.
Oh, okay.
She predates Phantoma. She predates Wonder Woman. She predates the Woman in Red. There were a few other female superheroes that were like, well, they were in newspaper comic strips, but they didn't wear costumes, or they had a costume, but they were only a sidekick, or they didn't have powers. But she had powers. She was a solo hero. She had a costume. Admittedly, it changed a little bit between issues, but it was primarily like the one I have on her is a combination of her most worn costumes. And
Okay.
so she is a cool character. And then I just took, given that thing I was saying earlier where I'm changing their names and making them my own characters, I took the magician from Mars and called her the Mars-Jishin, which sounds ridiculous and I love it. So
No, I think it works. Absolutely. So if you're watching this an hour later, head over to Kickstarter when you can. You got 11 days left on this one. It's a great looking book. Need to get a little over halfway to its goal. And yeah, let's make this one happen. This is really cool stuff. Kevin, thanks so much for stopping by and talking about all this great stuff with me. I obviously love talking about this, and the book looks fantastic.
thanks for having me on. I'm actually really honored to be here, and it seems like a great bunch. I also love the comments that are happening everybody should be following this
100%.
live whenever you do one of these videos, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're doing our best. We kind of retooled the show a little bit late last year, and we're kind of finding our way. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of work that out, and with Joey and myself, and then also it's great to talk to creators like yourselves.
And by the way, you can also find me on another podcast. I'm regularly on My Primo's podcast. I'm one of the regular hosts there. Although this month I'm extremely busy with a bunch of things going on, so I'm probably not going to join him this month. But we always cover, all kinds of stuff, comic books and movies and video games from a Latino perspective, as we put it. So we're doing a different take on it.
Very cool. Absolutely. So check that out as well.
My Primo's podcast.
And one more thing I want to mention, or a couple more things, is Archetypes is live now. We have 17 days left to go over our goal. So we're just kind of adding extras at this point. A lot of great stuff here. I can show a few pages from Ace Falcon that I just wrapped up.
No relation to Flick Falcon.
To who?
Flick Falcon, the guy we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, no relation at all. So just wrap this one up. Really excited with how it turned out. You're going to find us in Archetypes. You're also going to find
Love that art. That is beautiful, gorgeous art.
Thank you.
I like the heavy shadows and the contrast. That's something that I've always admired in art. Is that heavy, using the medium for what it is.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was trying to go for here. Is force myself to do some of those things I struggle to do when I'm just kind of not going in with the plan. And it was a good way to do that. So you can see this in archetypes. You'll also see this in some other. I think we have to stop sharing to show the next thing here. Share screen.
Hype archetypes. I like that.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I was looking at some of your older ones. When is you already have a pre-launch page. Okay, I didn't see the
this is going to be the lead-in. The campaign is over on zook.gg. That's also in pre-launch. That's the big Crisis on Infinite Earth Secret Wars style story. But I'm kind of doing this preview sort of thing here. It's going to have some Ace Falcon. It's going to have some other stories. It's going to have a little bit of illustrated prose, which you'd see a lot of in the old Golden Age comics. So head over to Kickstarter. The link is in the description, and you can be on the pre-launch for this one.
Could you refresh that page real quick?
This one.
Yeah.
46.
Look at that. You got one more person just start following you, and it might be me.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So this one, I'm excited to be putting this together. Some surprise characters there as well. So just to wrap up, Joey's comment is we need to stop talking about cool stuff to finish a Kickstarter build. I guess it's time to do it. I got two things to mention. One, I wanted to show a campaign from our friends at Band of Bards is going to be live very soon. So head over there, check out this Coins of Judas by Travis Gibb and company, I believe. A bunch of great creators. So this should be live soon. Check that out. And then the other thing I should mention before we head out is at Geek Collective, I mentioned kind of a little bit about what we do, but we also have a deal with Gemini mailers. So if you, let me get rid of that comment. My current comment, there we go. It's very important, obviously, to make sure these go out like your backers demand. So if you head over to Gemini Comic Supply, use the code Geek Collective 10, you'll get 10% off, and that can make a big difference. So head over there and do that. I think that wraps it up. So just everybody that tuned in, I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the backing. Kevin, I really appreciate you making time to come on and talk with me, man.
It was
a busy day.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let me know if you want me on again sometime.
Will do. Let me play us out of here with our outro, and I will see everyone next week.